Hejin walked through the quiet halls of the hydroponics lab, her footsteps echoing in the early morning silence. The clock on the wall showed 5:30 a.m., too early for most colonists, but perfect for her daily checks of the seedlings. She loved these peaceful moments when she could be alone with her plants. The artificial lights in the lab created a soft purple glow, helping the earth plants grow on this strange new world. Hejin smiled as she checked the tomato seedlings she had planted last week. They were growing well, reaching up toward the light just like they would have back on Earth. "Good morning, little ones," she whispered, reaching out to touch one of the leaves. It was something she did every morning, a small habit that made this dome on Kepler 186f feel more like home. But today was different. The moment her finger touched a leaf, something strange happened. The thin layer of frost spread from her fingertip, racing across the green surface. Hejin pulled her hand back quickly, but it was too late. The entire plant was turning white, covered in a layer of ice that shouldn't have been possible in the warm lab. "No, no, no," she muttered, stepping back. Her heart began to race as she watched the ice spread to nearby plants. Every seedling the first plant touched was freezing solid, creating a chain reaction of frost and ice. Hejin ran to the emergency console and hit the quarantine button. Red lights began flashing as thick barriers slid down from the ceiling, sealing off this section of the lab. She had been trained for contaminations, but nothing like this. Her hands shaking, she pulled out her tablet to call her sister. "Yunna, something's wrong. Something's really wrong." "Hejin, why are you calling so early?" Yunna's sleepy voice came through the speaker. "I need you to come to Hydroponics Lab 3. Now, don't tell anyone else yet. Please." While waiting for her sister, Hejin paced the sealed room, careful not to touch anything else. Her mind raced with questions. Was she contaminated? Was it some kind of alien bacteria? Would she freeze everything she touched now? To test her fears, she touched a metal table. Nothing happened. She touched a plastic container. Again, nothing. But when she carefully touched another plant, it froze instantly. Yinha arrived 15 minutes later, looking through the quarantine barrier's window with worried eyes. Hejin explained what happened, demonstrating with another plant. She watched her sister's face change from worry to shock as the plant froze solid. "I'll get you one," Yunha said, referring to the colony's head scientist. "Don't move. Don't touch anything living. We'll figure this out." Within an hour, the lab was filled with people in protective suits. They moved Hejin to a special quarantine room, taking samples of her blood and running tests. Through the glass walls, she could see more scientists arriving, all staring at her with a mixture of fear and fascination. She sat on the bed, hugging her knees to her chest. The small white room felt more like a cage than a medical facility. On her tablet, she read the initial report. 17 plants dead, all frozen solid at temperatures that shouldn't have been possible without special equipment. As Hejin watched the scientists discuss her case outside her room, she realized her life would never be the same. Whatever was happening to her, whatever she had become, had turned her into something both fascinating and dangerous. And in a colony this small, she knew she couldn't hide it for long. The question now was, what would they do with her? James Cooper stared out the window of the landing shuttle as it descended toward New Sol Colony. The planet's pink sky and 2 moons made him feel like he was in a dream. After 6 months of space travel, he was finally reaching his destination. "First time on Kepler 186f?" asked the pilot, noticing James's amazed expression. "That obvious, huh?" James smiled, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. "I've studied everything about this place, but seeing it in person is different." The shuttle touched down smoothly on the landing pad. James gathered his bags, double-checking that he had all his engineering tools. As the door opened, he felt the artificial atmosphere hit his face. It was colder than Earth, but breathable thanks to the dome above the colony. Keita, the head of security, met him at the entrance. Welcome to New Seoul, Mr. Cooper. I trust your journey was comfortable. The security chief's uniform was crisp and neat, matching the clean lines of the colony's architecture. Please call me James. And yes, it was fine. I'm eager to start work on the terraforming systems. As they walked through the colony's main corridor, James noticed something odd. People were whispering, and many seemed worried. He caught fragments of conversations about someone in quarantine and something about freezing. Is everything okay? James asked Kita. The colony seems tense. Kita's expression tightened. We've had an incident. Nothing that will affect your work on the terraforming project. He changed the subject quickly. Let me show you to your quarters. But James's curiosity was already sparked. During his first few days, he kept hearing more whispers. A woman who could freeze things with a touch. Plants turning to ice. Scientists baffled by impossible temperatures. One evening, while reviewing the colony's power systems, James noticed something interesting. The quarantine section was using much more power than usual, power being used for temperature regulation. He found Ju-1, the head scientist, in his lab. The older man was staring at screen after screen of data, looking tired and frustrated. Excuse me, Dr. Ju-1. I noticed the power readings in the quarantine section. Ju-1 looked up, surprised. Ah, the new engineer. Yes, we're having to keep that section at a very specific temperature. It's complicated. I specialize in complicated, James said with a smile. Maybe I could help. My work with electromagnetic fields might be useful. Ju-1 seemed to consider this for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. What do you know about biological thermal manipulation? Not much, James admitted. But I know about energy transfer and containment systems. And honestly, I'm really curious about all these rumors. Rumors? Ju-1 raised an eyebrow. About someone who can freeze things they touch. At first, I thought people were joking, but nobody's laughing. Ju-1 stood up and walked to a window overlooking the quarantine section. Her name is He-Jin. 3 days ago, she developed an ability we can't explain. Everything living she touches freezes instantly. Plants, insects. We can't risk her touching another person. James joined him at the window. In the room below, he could see a young woman sitting alone, reading something on a tablet. She looked perfectly normal, but completely isolated. Has anyone considered that the planet's electromagnetic field might be involved? James asked. The readings have been unusual lately. Ju-1 turned to him with sudden interest. No, we hadn't thought of that. Would you like to join our research team, Mr. Cooper? We could use a fresh perspective. James nodded, still watching He-Jin through the window. Something about her situation touched him deeply. Yes, he said. I'd like to help. Little did he know, his decision would change both their lives forever. The power went out at exactly 3:47 a.m. He-Jin woke up to darkness and the sound of emergency alarms. In her quarantine room, even the usual hum of the temperature control systems was silent. Hello, she called out. No answer. The observation room outside her glass walls was empty. Somewhere in the building, she heard running footsteps and voices shouting about backup generators. He-Jin sat up in her bed, heart beating faster. Without power, the temperature in her room would start to rise. She hadn't told anyone, but lately, she'd been feeling strange tingles whenever she got too warm. In the main control room, James was working frantically with the other engineers. The main power core is overheating, he explained to Ju-1. We need to shut everything down and restart. We can't. Eun-ha burst into the room. He-Jin's quarantine systems are down. The room temperature is rising too fast. James looked at the readings on his tablet. The quarantine section was already 10 degrees warmer than normal. Without thinking twice, he grabbed a flashlight and started running. Cooper, stop! Kita shouted after him. It's not safe. But James was already halfway there. He used his engineer's key card to override the emergency locks. As he entered the quarantine area, he could feel the heat building up. He-Jin was standing in the middle of her room, pressing herself against the wall, trying to stay away from the door. Frost was spreading from her hands onto the wall surface. "Stay back," she warned when she saw James. "I don't want to hurt you." "The temperature controls are down," James explained, stepping closer. "We need to get you out of here before it gets worse." "No, I can't leave. I might freeze someone." The room was getting hotter. He-Jin could feel ice forming on her skin, her body trying to fight the heat. James saw it too, tiny crystals of frost appearing and melting on her arms. "You're in pain," he said softly. "Please, let me help." "I can't." He-Jin's voice shook, but another wave of heat hit her, and she stumbled. James moved without hesitation. He caught her before she could fall. They both froze, expecting the worst. He-Jin waited to feel the horrible sensation of ice spreading from her hands. James waited to feel the cold take over his body. Nothing happened. How? He-Jin stared at where her hand touched his arm. No ice. No frost. Nothing. James was equally shocked. "I don't feel cold at all." Through the quarantine room's window, they could see Yunha, Ju-won, and Ki-ta watching in amazement. Yunha had her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with surprise. "Why aren't you freezing?" He-Jin asked, still holding onto his arm. It was the first human contact she'd had in days, and tears began forming in her eyes. "I don't know," James said honestly, "but we need to get you out of here now." The room's still heating up. He-Jin nodded, and for the first time since her ability appeared, she let someone lead her by the hand. They walked out of the quarantine room together, past the stunned scientists and security officers. In the hallway, the emergency lights cast everything in a red glow. He-Jin couldn't stop staring at where her hand met James'. After days of freezing everything she touched, this simple contact felt like a miracle. "Let's get you somewhere safe," James said gently. "Then we can figure out why this is happening." As they walked through the dark corridors, both of them knew that everything had changed. The question was, what did it mean for them and for the colony? The medical lab was busy with activity the next morning. Yunha moved from screen to screen, comparing test results. On one side of the room, He-Jin sat on an examination table. On the other side, James sat on a similar table. Both had several small sensors attached to their arms. "I don't understand," Yunha said, shaking her head. "He-Jin's body temperature is below freezing, but she's perfectly healthy. And James, your readings are completely normal." Ju-won walked into the lab, holding a thick folder. "I think I found something interesting." He put several images up on the main screen. "Look at the DNA patterns." Everyone looked at the screen. There were two sets of DNA images side by side. "The one on the left is He-Jin's DNA," Ju-won explained. "The one on the right is James. Notice anything different?" Yunha stepped closer to the screen. He-Jin's DNA has the colony modifications. James doesn't. "Exactly," Ju-won said. "Everyone in this colony except James has modified DNA. We needed those changes to survive better on this planet. But now I'm wondering if those modifications are reacting strangely with the planet's environment." James raised his hand. "Could it be connected to the electromagnetic field?" "The readings have been unusual lately." "That's what we think," Ju-won nodded. "The planet's field might be affecting the modified genes, causing He-Jin's freezing ability." He-Jin listened quietly. She looked at her hands, then at James. "But why am I the only one with this problem? Nobody else in the colony is freezing things." "Maybe it's not a problem," James said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. "Think about it. What if it's an adaptation? The planet is trying to change us, and He-Jin is the first one to show these changes." Yunha typed quickly on her tablet. "That actually makes sense. The modified genes were designed to help us adapt. Maybe they're working too well in He-Jin's case." But why can James touch me safely? Jin asked the question everyone was thinking about. Because I'm completely human, James said. No modifications. Whatever is happening between your modified genes and the planet's field doesn't affect me. Ju-1 picked up a small plant in a pot. Jin, would you try something? Touch the plant. But this time, try to think about not freezing it. If this is an adaptation, maybe you can control it. Jin looked nervous, but she reached out slowly. The moment her finger touched the leaf, frost began to spread. She pulled back quickly. It's okay, James said. He moved to stand next to her. Try again, but this time, hold my hand with your other hand. Maybe it will help you stay grounded. Jin took James's hand. It felt warm and normal. With her other hand, she touched the plant again. This time, the frost spread more slowly. She concentrated hard, thinking about stopping the ice. To everyone's surprise, the frost stopped spreading halfway across the leaf. You did it, Young-ha said excitedly. You controlled it. Jin stared at the half-frozen leaf in amazement. She was still holding James's hand, and for the first time since this all started, she felt hope. This is just the beginning, Ju-1 said, looking thoughtful. We need to understand exactly how this works. Jin, James, would you both be willing to help us with more tests? They looked at each other and nodded. Whatever was happening, they would figure it out together. The medical lab was busy with activity the next morning. Young-ha moved from screen to screen, comparing test results. On one side of the room, Jin sat on an examination table. On the other side, James sat on a similar table. Both had several small sensors attached to their arms. I don't understand, Young-ha said, shaking her head. Jin's body temperature is below freezing, but she's perfectly healthy. And James, your readings are completely normal. Ju-1 walked into the lab, holding a thick folder. I think I found something interesting. He put several images up on the main screen. Look at the DNA patterns. Everyone looked at the screen. There were two sets of DNA images side by side. The one on the left is Jin's DNA, Ju-1 explained. The one on the right is James. Notice anything different? Young-ha stepped closer to the screen. Jin's DNA has the colony modifications. James doesn't. Exactly, Ju-1 said. Everyone in this colony except James has modified DNA. We needed those changes to survive better on this planet. But now I'm wondering if those modifications are reacting strangely with the planet's environment. James raised his hand. Could it be connected to the electromagnetic field? The readings have been unusual lately. That's what we think, Ju-1 nodded. The planet's field might be affecting the modified genes, causing Jin's freezing ability. Jin listened quietly. She looked at her hands, then at James. But why am I the only one with this problem? Nobody else in the colony is freezing things. Maybe it's not a problem, James said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. Think about it. What if it's an adaptation? The planet is trying to change us, and Jin is the first one to show these changes. Young-ha typed quickly on her tablet. That actually makes sense. The modified genes were designed to help us adapt. Maybe they're working too well in Jin's case. But why can James touch me safely? Jin asked the question everyone was thinking about. Because I'm completely human, James said. No modifications. Whatever is happening between your modified genes and the planet's field doesn't affect me. Ju-1 picked up a small plant in a pot. Jin, would you try something? Touch the plant. But this time, try to think about not freezing it. If this is an adaptation, maybe you can control it. Jin looked nervous, but she reached out slowly. The moment her finger touched the leaf, frost began to spread. She pulled back quickly. It's okay, James said. He moved to stand next to her. Try again, but this time, hold my hand with your other hand. Maybe it will help you stay grounded. Jin took James's hand. It felt warm and normal. With her other hand, she touched the plant again. This time, the frost spread more slowly. She concentrated hard, thinking about stopping the ice. To everyone's surprise, the frost stopped spreading halfway across the leaf. "You did it," Yunha said excitedly. "You controlled it." Hejin stared at the half-frozen leaf in amazement. She was still holding James's hand, and for the first time since this all started, she felt hope. "This is just the beginning," Ju-won said, looking thoughtful. "We need to understand exactly how this works. Hejin, James, would you both be willing to help us with more tests?" They looked at each other and nodded. Whatever was happening, they would figure it out together. The alarms started during dinner time. Red lights flashed throughout the colony as warning messages blared from every speaker. "Warning. Critical temperature increase in main reactor. All personnel evacuate to safe zones immediately." In the dining hall, people jumped up from their meals and started running. James was already checking his tablet, his face growing pale as he read the emergency data. "The cooling system is failing," he said to Hejin, who sat across from him. "The reactor's temperature is rising too fast." Kita's voice came over the speakers. "All engineers report to the control room immediately." This is not a drill. James and Hejin ran to the control room, where they found chaos. Engineers were shouting numbers at each other, while Ju-won tried to make sense of the readings on the main screen. "The backup cooling systems aren't responding," one engineer reported. "Temperature still rising." "How long do we have?" Kita asked. "Maybe 2 hours before the reactor goes critical," James said, studying the numbers. "If we can't cool it down by then." He didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what would happen. The reactor would melt down, and the colony would be destroyed. "What about the emergency coolant?" Yunha asked. "We used it last month during the dust storm," another engineer replied. "The new supply isn't due for 3 weeks." Hejin had been quiet, watching everyone panic. Finally, she spoke up. "I could help." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Ju-won asked. "I can freeze things," Hejin said simply. "I could freeze the reactor core, cool it down." "No," James stepped forward. "The radiation levels near the reactor are dangerous. It could kill you." "The protective suits," Hejin started. "Won't work," Kitai interrupted. "Your ability needs direct contact. You'd have to touch the reactor housing directly." "Then that's what I'll do," Hejin said firmly. James grabbed her hand. "Hejin, please. We can find another way." But Ju-won was already checking calculations on his tablet. It could work. Her freezing ability is strong enough. If she could control it like she's been practicing. "You can't be serious," Yunha protested. "That's my sister you're talking about." The room erupted in arguments. Some thought it was too dangerous. Others said it was their only choice. The temperature warnings kept getting worse. "Stop," Hejin shouted. Everyone went quiet again. "It's my choice, and I choose to try." James looked at her with worry in his eyes. "Then I'm going with you." "No," Hejin said softly. "I need you to stay here. Help monitor the temperatures. Guide me through it from here." She squeezed his hand. "You've helped me learn to control this power. Now let me use it to save everyone." Kaita checked his watch. "If we're doing this, we need to move now. The radiation shielding won't last much longer." Hejin nodded. She looked at James one last time, trying to memorize his face. "If something goes wrong." "Nothing will go wrong," James said firmly. "You're going to do this, and then you're coming back. Promise me." Hejin smiled sadly. "I promise to try." As she walked out of the control room with Kita and the emergency team, the colony's warnings continued to blare. The fate of everyone now rested in the hands of the woman who could freeze anything she touched. Hejin stood in the radiation suit prep room, watching as technicians rushed to modify a protective suit for her. They had cut away the gloves so her hands would be bare. She needed direct contact with the reactor to use her power. The reactor temperature is now at critical levels, a voice announced over the speakers. 1 hour until system failure. Inha burst into the room, tears in her eyes. Sister, please, don't do this. I have to, Hejin said softly. You know I do. But the radiation, Inha's voice broke, will kill everyone if the reactor melts down, Hejin finished. At least this way, there's a chance. In the control room, James was arguing with Ju-1. There has to be another way. We could try to vent the reactor chamber. There's no time, Ju-1 said firmly. The venting systems are already damaged. Hejin is our only hope. James ran his hands through his hair in frustration. He grabbed his tablet and ran to the prep room. When he got there, Hejin was already putting on the modified suit. Wait, he said, breathing hard. I calculated something. He showed her his tablet. If you can freeze the reactor in stages, starting from the outer layer and working in, you might survive. But you have to be precise. Too much ice too quickly could crack the housing. Hejin took the tablet, studying the diagrams. Like freezing the plants. Just bigger. Much bigger, James said. And you'll only have one chance. Keita entered the room. It's time. The radiation shielding is failing faster than we thought. We need to move now. Hejin handed the tablet back to James. Their fingers touched, and she held on for a moment. James, if I don't make it back. Don't, he interrupted. Don't say goodbye. He pulled her into a hug, not caring who saw. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You can do this. Over the speakers, another warning blared. 50 minutes until critical failure. Hejin pulled away from James. She looked at her sister, then at the man who had helped her see her power as a gift rather than a curse. I'm not saying goodbye, she said. I'm saying thank you. Both of you taught me that being different doesn't mean being alone. She put on the helmet of her modified suit. Keita and 2 other security officers would escort her to the reactor room. As they walked out, James spoke into his communicator. I'll guide you through it, every step of the way. The colony corridors were empty now, everyone evacuated to the safe zones. Hejin's footsteps echoed as she walked toward the reactor section. Through her communicator, she could hear the control room team tracking her progress. Reactor room doors opening. Keita announced. Good luck, Hejin. The massive doors slid open, revealing the glowing reactor core beyond. Heat rolled out in waves, making the air shimmer. Hejin took a deep breath and stepped forward. Remember, James's voice came through her communicator, steady and calm. Just like we practiced. You can do this. Hejin walked toward the reactor, her bare hands ready. The fate of the entire colony rested on her ability to control a power she was still learning to understand. But this time, she wasn't afraid of it. This time, she would use it to save everyone. Hejin stood before the glowing reactor, her hands shaking slightly. The heat was intense, even through her protective suit. She could feel sweat running down her face inside her helmet. Reactor temperature still rising. Someone reported through her communicator. 45 minutes remaining. Hejin, James's voice came through clearly. Start with the outer layer, just like we planned. She reached out and placed her hands on the hot metal surface of the reactor housing. Usually, her touch would freeze things instantly. But this time, she focused on controlling the spread of ice, just as she had practiced with the plants. First layer of frost forming. Ju-1 reported from the control room. Temperature dropping in outer shell. But something felt different. As Hejin touched the reactor, she didn't just feel the cold flowing from her hands. She felt the heat too. It was like she could sense the flow of temperature itself. James, she said suddenly. I can feel the heat. Not just making ice, I can feel the heat moving. In the control room, James and Yuna looked at each other. What do you mean? James asked. It's like I'm not just freezing things. I'm controlling temperature itself. He-Jin closed her eyes, concentrating on the sensation. The heat. I think I can move it. Eun-ha rushed to her computer. Of course. We were so focused on the freezing, we never considered. He-Jin, your ability isn't just to freeze things. You can control temperature in both directions. Try to draw the heat out, James suggested excitedly. Don't just freeze it. Guide the heat away from the core. He-Jin focused harder. She could feel it now. The flow of heat through the metal, through her hands. Instead of pushing cold in, she started pulling heat out. The reactor's glow began to dim. Amazing, Ju-won exclaimed. Core temperature dropping at 3 times the expected rate. How are you doing this? It's like finding balance, He-Jin explained, her voice strained with concentration. Hot and cold, they're connected. I can feel both sides now. In the control room, the temperature readings were changing faster than anyone had expected. The dangerous red warnings began turning yellow, then green. Keep going, James encouraged. You're doing it. 10 minutes passed, then 20. He-Jin stood steady, her hands glowing with a strange mix of frost and heat as she worked. The reactor's dangerous red glow had faded to a safe, steady blue. Core temperature now at normal levels, an engineer announced. All systems stabilizing. The radiation levels are dropping too, Eun-ha added. Whatever you're doing, it's working better than we hoped. He-Jin finally stepped back from the reactor, exhausted but smiling inside her helmet. I understand it now, she said. This power, it was never just about freezing things. It's about balance, about controlling temperature itself. Get her out of there, James ordered. Now that we know what she can really do, we need to run proper tests, safe ones. As the security team led He-Jin back through the reactor room doors, she felt different. For the first time since her power appeared, she felt truly in control. This wasn't a curse or even just a gift. It was a tool, one that she was finally learning to use properly. In the control room, James and Eun-ha were already discussing the implications. If she can control temperature like this, Eun-ha said excitedly, think of what it could mean for the colony, for terraforming. James smiled, watching through the cameras as He-Jin made her way back. She's going to change everything, he said softly. And this is just the beginning. 3 months after the reactor incident, the new Seoul colony looked very different. Temperature control stations were set up throughout the dome, each one carefully designed by James and operated by He-Jin. The colony had never been more comfortable or efficient. He-Jin stood at her newest control station, her hands resting on the main panel. With a gentle touch, she adjusted the temperature in the farm section, making it perfect for the growing plants. She could feel the heat and cold flowing through the colony's systems like rivers she could direct wherever they needed to go. The tomatoes are growing twice as fast now, Eun-ha said, walking into the station with her tablet. Your temperature control is better than any machine we've ever used. He-Jin smiled at her sister. Who would have thought that something that scared us so much would turn out to be so useful? James entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to He-Jin, their fingers touching naturally, comfortably. These days, nobody even remarked about him being the only one who could touch her. It was just part of who they were. The new colonists arrive next week, he said, sipping his coffee. The Earth Council approved our expansion plan. They're calling New Seoul the most successful colony in the system. Thanks to you both, Eun-ha added. Your work on the temperature control system is revolutionary. Other colonies are already asking to copy our design. He-Jin looked out the window at the dome above them. Beyond it, she could see the pink sky of Kepler 186f. Do you think there are others like me out there? Other colonists developing new abilities? Probably, James said. Ju-won's research suggests that the modified genes are still adapting to this planet. You were just the first. He took her hand. And the bravest for learning to use your ability instead of hiding from it. Just then, Ki-tae's voice came over the speaker. He-Jin, we need you in the new section. The heating system is acting up again. On my way, she replied. She squeezed James's hand before letting go. Want to help me balance some temperatures? Always, he smiled. They walked together through the colony corridors. Unlike before, people didn't step away when He-Jin passed. Instead, they smiled and waved. Some even stopped to thank her for keeping their homes comfortable. In the new section, a group of engineers was waiting. The room was too hot on one side and too cold on the other. Once, this would have taken days to fix with machines. Now, He-Jin just placed her hands on the control panels and closed her eyes. James watched as she worked, seeing the subtle glow that appeared around her hands when she used her power. She had learned to control it so perfectly now. The room's temperature slowly evened out, becoming perfectly balanced. Much better, one of the engineers said. You make it look so easy. It is easy, He-Jin said, opening her eyes. Once you understand that it's not about fighting the temperature, it's about finding balance. Later that evening, He-Jin and James stood at their favorite window, watching the colony's lights reflect off the dome. His arm was around her shoulders, and she leaned against him, comfortable in the knowledge that her touch would never harm him. What do you think the future holds? She asked softly. James looked at her, remembering the scared woman who once couldn't touch anyone. Now she was the colony's hero, a pioneer in human adaptation to alien worlds. I think, he said, the future is whatever we choose to make it, together. He-Jin smiled, knowing he was right. What had started as a curse had become a gift, not just to her, but to everyone. And somewhere out there, other colonists might be discovering their own gifts, their own ways to adapt and grow on this new world. The woman who froze everything she touched had found her purpose, her place, and her perfect balance.